your
Welcome to the Cybersecurity Cafe podcast. Today I'm joined with Mike Reed, co-founder and chief operating officer of Realis Solutions Group, a boutique AI and emerging risk advisory based out of the Austin area. Mike is one of those rare people who's seen cybersecurity from just about every angle. He's helped launch Exchange and Microsoft Active Directory back at Microsoft, worked on early enterprise Apple, was named Channel Manager of the Year at Mobile Iron, and led the worldwide managed security ISV business at AWS. Then he crossed over to the practitioner side as a field CISO at Fortra, and then he wrote extensively on AI security, API security, and even AI-enabled espionage. Sounds really awesome. And co-authored The Guide to Secure AI Innovation. He's seen the industry from both sides of the builder and the practitioner side, so he doesn't just drink the Kool-Aid, and he's exactly the kind of perspective I want to have on this show. Mike, welcome to the cafe.
Thanks, Rafi. I'm looking forward to it. That was a fantastic intro.
So your arc of your career, Microsoft, Apple, AWS, building security products, big firms, then moving over to Fortra as a field CISO, advising clients, and then now co-founding a two-person consultancy. What actually drove you to move from that global platform to doing a boutique firm by yourself?
You know, it was actually some stuff that happened on the global platform. So to your point, I've had a career on the edge of technology. So at Microsoft, the launch of Microsoft Exchange coming out of MS Mail, the launch of Active Directory coming out of NT Networking, joining Apple to help build out the support infrastructure for the iPhone. An industry-leading product. And for Apple, even inside of Apple, leading how do we provide support on Windows machines as a company devoted to Apple?
Okay.
Yeah, they were going to plug into USB ports. And then, okay, we've got these phones. Now they're in the enterprise and there's enterprise data on them. How do we secure them? Okay, how does that security tie into the rest of our security? So it's just been a progression through managed security and then, going into AWS. I came into AWS because of AWS Marketplace and led the network security side of AWS Marketplace for about a year, and then got a chance to move over and take on the ISVs or building software that MSSPs use to deliver services. So what's the difference in building for a customer when the customer is the service provider versus the end user? And at AWS, as part of that MSSP initiative, got to work with some really interesting customers who were building new things, but didn't know how to classify or categorize them in the market. Met some incredible folks at AWS, and now two of us have left together and co-founded what's now Realis. My co-founder, Emily, actually left about 6 months before I did, and established as Advanced Threat Intelligence Group. And we quickly realized that being a threat intelligence consulting company put us into the bucket that we didn't want to be in. We weren't behind the curve figuring out what happened. We wanted to be ahead of the curve, figuring out what are the risks, and not just the risks of failure, but the risks of success. So we had some very successful discussions with customers while we were at AWS about what happens if this works. What are the things that you need to look around the corner or behind the door? And so that's what we're focused on now at Realis.
That's a really interesting perspective. So risk of success. Can you dive into that a little bit more?
Yeah. So let's take a real risk today that AI is introduced. Now, disclaimer, I don't have any affiliation with self-driving auto companies or technology. But if you're a company that uses self-driving autos to provide transportation services, and that vehicle gets in a wreck and the passenger gets injured, is there any difference in the scope of the incident, the injury to the passenger, based solely on who or what was driving? Absolutely not. What's going to count is, can you prove safety, efficacy, training, licensure? And you're going to do the same things for that AI self-driving system as you would for a human. How was it trained? How did I validate that? How often do I check on that? When's it last been tested? What oversight did I have? And then, leading to the culpability. So AI in that case didn't change the risk. It just put different qualifications on how I need to approach it. And the only time I have that risk is if people are willing to get in my car and pay me money. So success creates the risk of, do I know how to respond to something that's happened?
So in the case of automobiles, you do have a licensure model. And so whether it's the person that is behind the wheel in while it's in a self-driving mode, or if there's nobody, like in the case of something like a Waymo, who is the licensure at that point? And then if it's something that doesn't have licensing, does AI have or is there a risk area that AI can provide in that scenario where there is no license?
And can you apply the same heuristics that you would for a human to AI and be able to prove in court that you did more than just due diligence? You didn't have AI drive a simulator. Hey, we tested this in live courses. Here's the video from the courses. We, running through all the test scenarios, and we retest it every 6 months, to prove that my model didn't drift. And it decide one day, okay, I can run over small things, but not large things. You just gotta, you've got to play catch up there. But the understanding, A, is there risk, and B, is it different because of AI? Is where a lot of people, both on the technology and the business side, get confused. Well, if it happens with AI, I'm never going to be able to prove that I was safe. That's not necessarily true. It might be easier to prove that with AI than with a human who, how much sleep did you get last night? How much caffeine have you had today? How many hours have you been driving?
You probably have more telemetry in those cases as well.
Right.
Like, I know I know my Tesla brakes hard when a leaf blows in front of it. So it's probably being overly careful in some cases because of that situation. So that's interesting. So you going back to, you were in kind of some early technologies. I know from myself, I ran the global Active Directory rollout for Invesco early on when we first started out. We did we were also Exchange was actually the main reason why we were doing that. Up to that point, we were a piecemeal of MS Mail and Lotus CC Mail here and there all over the world. And it was a part of getting that all together. So very interesting. And then even when I first started my managed service practice, one of my early clients, we were looking at when the iPhone was released in 2007, actually right before I started my company, and how to get those integrated into businesses. And it wasn't really meant for business use at that point too. So very interesting. The parallels where you were and where I was in those conversations. So when when you're talking from a small shop, you're now a small company, agile shop. What could you do now, do you think, that you couldn't do inside a large organization like AWS?
So I think the largest factor that drove us to do this external, to any large company, is the fact that we're not driven to sell a specific product or service. For example, if we wanted to deliver business value consulting as part of AWS, hey, how do you get value out of your investment in using or building AI? Unless that was going to drive specific AWS use cases, hey, I'm going to use more Bedrock, I'm going to use more Quick, then it wasn't something AWS prioritized. It was something done in terms of having some customer value, but if it didn't relate or translate to product value, hey, there's this product sale as a follow through. It wasn't something AWS was likely to invest in. And
so it's kind of like working for Morgan Stanley and not, recommending Morgan Stanley products as part of your
right. And so we saw a real opportunity to say, hey, there's nothing wrong with choosing to partner with AWS to build and use. There's nothing wrong with choosing anyone, but what goes into that choice, and what do you have to look at internally? So for us, it's come down to two places on the business side. Either a company they're using AI today and they don't really have a strategy or real governance around it. So they're using Claude Cowork, they're using Copilot, they've got Notion plugged in, taking meeting notes. So they have it, but they may not be fully aware of all of the risks if they don't, understand what the data is or how it's used. Or they have a really good strategy and really strong governance, but that hasn't translated to how do I use this effectively for my business? Again, whether it's building in, especially with the CFO. When you get into software development, there's an entirely different approach to figuring out how to monetize an AI-based application than SaaS. And the highlight is SaaS, I build the application and I invest all of the engineering time into getting built, and then I launch, and I expect really high margins, and my board expects really high margins if I run 75, 80%.
Right.
Because my cost is all in building the app and then, features and ongoing and things like that. But if I build an AI app, it's much more like traditional manufacturing. If Ford wants to build a car and the price of steel goes up, they either raise the price of the car, they take a margin hit, or they change the steel they're using. Exactly the same model with AI. If I build an AI application that's using tokens to deliver a service to customer and the cost of tokens goes up, I either have to raise my price, which induces churn, lower my margin, which
Right.
makes my board unhappy, or figure out, can I use alternative tokens? Is there a better quality of steel for my application?
Interesting. Yeah, that's a very different thought process than most software is being built today. That's
Right.
it's a very interesting thing. We've been talking a lot internally as well as to some clients about that kind of token optimization or the model optimization, and how, my thesis is that we're going into that multi-model world now. As people are understanding, we're hearing about OpenAI not being able to even cover their expenses. They might run out of money actually over the next number of months if they don't go public. And if they don't go if they can't go public if their finances aren't cleaned up. So they're kind of in this little a mess. What's going on at Anthropic, we really don't know what their monetary situation is. So at some point, but this is a really useful technology. Yeah, on top of that. So, but if you can't make a business this driver out of this, if there's not a real good market for it, that's a problem. And I think that's where we go into these multi-model situations. And the harnesses are actually going to be, I think, the next set of winners that do that. So you wrote a piece, interesting enough, you're talking about Claude, around Mythos and Project Glasswing that I thought was really refreshing. Can you walk us through that a little bit?
So we took a look at Mythos and Glasswing and looked at it from the vulnerability perspective and realized it is now faster for attackers to identify vulnerabilities, but that doesn't necessarily mean that if they're identified, they can be exploited.
Okay.
If I can find a vulnerability, but there's some other mitigating control that sits in front of that, maybe there's a SQL injection vulnerability, but I've already got an application firewall that's looking for SQL injection, I may not have that exposed. Or, if there's some Linux kernel thing, but I'm not exposing my Linux kernel to the internet, I'm putting it behind web servers and everything else. It's a vulnerability, but it's not necessarily an exploit. And what changes is that the attackers have AI too. Yeah. So when you start looking at security, the first thing you have to make sure is, have I covered the basics? Am I exposing things I don't need to expose, both internally and externally? And if I am exposing them, am I doing things like encryption, logging, monitoring, good SIM, good managed security? Am I not using passwords of password? Am I using things other than passwords to authenticate? Just doing the basic, doing your own scanning, doing your own penetration testing, whether it's yours or third party. Same thing with vulnerability management. Just get the basics covered. And there are enough targets that don't have the basics covered that it reduces, reducing your attack surface reduces the threat. What Mythos and Glasswing did is really expose to companies, you can't rely on, hey, my vendor found this problem, I'll have a patch in 3 months. Or my corporate patch window is every 30 days. The risk model changed. The reason people didn't patch is because patches could break existing software that were depending on that bug or that thing not working right. You implement the patch, you break some other workflow in the organization. Now you got to rebalance that to say, hey, I really need to prioritize patching and then work on fixing other issues first. So how quickly can I get things into labs? You saw the issue with CrowdStrike when they released a client that blue screened a bunch of things on Windows.
Right.
And I'm going to make the caveat: don't look at the problem, look at the response. CrowdStrike did an amazing job responding to that. But what that proved is you should be able to test these in a lab environment before they go live. But just like you're using AI to accelerate the ability to code, you can use AI to accelerate the ability to test and get things into production.
Yeah.
That's the message.
So while Mythos and Project Glasswing specifically has increased the number of vulnerabilities that need to be patched that are in queue, but you're saying that we're not properly using the tool to mitigate the issue and actually test the issue against those issues going forward. Or
right. AI gives you the opportunity to do better testing at scale and to do better testing at speed. And the good vendors in your basic security model, the firewall vendors, the patch management vendors, the threat intelligence groups are going to start building more AI into those tools,
Right.
but it's not a replacement for how do I make this work in my business and how do I adjust the risk of a vulnerability versus the risk of something in my business not working. If I apply a patch and all of a sudden my ERP software doesn't work anymore, that's probably a bigger problem than mitigating the risk some other way. So
Yeah.
it takes going back to the basics to get it right.
There was kind of a grouping of technology that I feel like it kind of got merged into application firewalls partially, where it would basically, they called it virtual patching back in the day. I don't know if you recall this, where it would like sit in front of applications and it basically look at known vulnerabilities and then mitigate against them without having to patch the underlying product. I'm wondering if we're going to get into that same kind of world where we're able to react to the new CVE, the new vulnerability that comes out that AI uncovers faster that way versus patching the code underneath it. And whether or not that is going to now spawn a whole new set of security tools that people are going to look to buy that can react at the speed of AI while we can't patch at the same speed. Patching is different than finding vulnerabilities, right? When you're finding vulnerabilities, it's easier to find the vulnerability than fix it most of the time. We've been helping out some clients with some application security assessments, and it takes multiple cycles for the developers to get it right in order to make sure that they're mitigating it. Even knowing what the pattern of the vulnerability is, it's not always easy to fix that. So interesting that. What are you seeing in terms of how you're working with clients in that space?
Yeah, so it goes back to one of the points that I made in that article. Mean time to patch is the most critical metric in vulnerability assessment now. It's not how long does it take me to find a patch, it's how long does it take me to get it applied when it's a third-party vendor. And so going back and looking at the tools to process and the risk is probably the most critical. But the second is if you're building software, whether it's for internal use or external, and you're not using AI code development tools to go and look for vulnerabilities as you write, you're missing a chance to head off the vulnerability at the time of code. So there is a difference between AI code authoring and AI code reviewing. And you can take a different approach to, I want all my code human written, I want all my code AI assisted, or I want all my code AI written and human reviewed. You've got to have the human in there. But writing the code and looking for vulnerabilities in my pipeline before I publish is more critical, because if I write a vulnerability, that's okay. If I haven't published the software yet, I can go fix it. If I write a vulnerability and my pipeline is set up to every time I commit something, it pushes live. Well, now I've pushed a vulnerability, and I can't depend on external vulnerability scans or pen testing picking that up, because now you look at Verizon's DBIR, you look at CrowdStrike's threat landscape report, you're seeing mean time to exploit under 9 minutes, and that's just crazy.
That's nuts. That's nuts. So we work with a lot of mid-market financial services firms, not the Fortune 100. What's the real AI security risk they should be really caring about right now versus what vendors are overselling today?
Yeah, so the biggest AI security risk for any mid-market company is somebody trying to do the right thing for the business, putting the wrong data in the wrong AI system. Somebody that drops your top 100 customer list into the public version of ChatGPT or Claude or something, either because you haven't blocked it or because you don't have a policy against it. So, the data exposure or data leakage into public AI tools. So what you really need is a very clear policy and a very clear set of tools that people are able to use so that you don't have the problem of shadow IT. And this goes to the point of, you may think you're blocking it on your network. I block Claude.ai, ChatGPT.com. I've got firewall de jure that blocks everything. That's all well and good until, let's go back to Apple. I pull out my iPhone and I take a picture of the Excel spreadsheet on the screen. And on my iPhone, on my personal account, submit that Excel spreadsheet to Claude, and it parses the image and pulls the data out. So that completely escapes everything that's in an enterprise control. It's bad behavior on the part of the user, but the way you fix bad behavior is either get rid of the user, which is typically not a good idea. You lose their experience and their knowledge, or give them the tools and the responsibility to safely use them and roll that out. So this goes back to, a lot of people have a really good strategy, but haven't done the tactical rollout of how do How do I make sure that my people know how to use Claude, ChatGPT, Copilot, whatever it is, and then encourage them to use it to augment, not replace them? This goes to a longer risk that I won't go down the rabbit hole of. It infers, it doesn't think, and it has no judgment. So if your people start deferring everything to AI, you end up with a judgment gap in the organization.
Yeah, it's the out of band security issue is an interesting one. It's very similar to when companies like Dropbox first came out and people wanted to use it. Companies were blocking it. Folks found a way around it, right? And so just like you can block all sorts of data exfiltration, put all sorts of DLP in place. But like you said, all you have to do is pull out a phone, take a picture of your screen, and now you have that. Now that data just leaked. And if you don't give your teams the tools to use, maybe you've decided, okay, we're going to use, I don't know, Grok. So to introduce another name into the mix, we're going to use Grok as our enterprise AI platform and block everything else. But at least you've now provided a tool for your team to use, rather than say, I'm going to block everything and not use anything. They're going to find a way around it. So what's the difference between finding a metric that nods through one and one that you actually engage with? Like what kind of metrics are you looking at to work with the C-suite?
So that's going to be really dependent on who in the C-suite we're engaging with. Typically we see engagement with either a CIO, CFO, or a CISO. And for all the CISOs out there, I want to let you know we understand your role, especially having been a field CISO where I didn't have organizational responsibility, but I had conversational responsibility. The joke I like to make is you can write a one-line description for most CISO job titles, and it's fit under the bus. The whole role of the CISO, I need you to fit under the bus when something goes wrong. And that's why you see 14-month life cycles for CISOs, going from one to the next to the next, because they're not given the organizational authority to actually be a chief of anything. And they're not given the same peer respect to be an officer versus a CEO, CFO, CIO. And they're caught in the middle. So when we talk metrics, it depends on who we're talking to. A CFO, it's got to be ROI. Hey, for the money you're spending, are you seeing either an increase in customer adoption, customer spend, or a decrease in churn? Is that helping you? So somebody comes and says, I want to build another chatbot. The first question from the CFO would be, okay, what's that going to do? Is a chatbot going to get me more customers? Is it going to reduce customers, reduce churn? Is it going to help me with support costs? Please don't build another chatbot. CIOs are worried about, I need to make sure that I know what regulatory requirements apply. And so I need to understand how AI is accessing data, what role that is, whether it's base machine learning, and algorithms going through there, or all the way up through agentic. Do I know the identity of the system accessing the data, how it's being used, and do I have a way to verifiably track responsible use? Comes down to a CIO. So a lot of that falls back to the ISO benchmarks, the metrics that are already established for security, just making sure you treat AI like the role it applies in an organization. And then for CISOs, that really comes down to, am I seeing organizational use of AI? Am I seeing things happen that my security tools are catching? Are my users pushing the boundaries and I'm seeing, hey, they tried to include this spreadsheet, but it had social security numbers, so my DLP blocked it? If they're not seeing those alerts, it's probably not because your users aren't doing it. It's because your tools aren't tuned to watch AI the same way they are, people. And it depends on if you're looking at the application or the network or, the connections, the cloud provider logs. There's all the different pieces. What we counsel people is take your existing metrics and figure out how to create an identity in your organization for AI that you can apply the same metrics you're using now. And then we'll recommend additional standards. Maybe you need to look at the EU AI security standards, or maybe you need to follow a different NIST standard because you're government approved. It's not that AI needs you to redo how you're measuring success. It's you need to include AI in how you're measuring success. And if you're seeing silence, enjoy the silence if it's real, but ask yourself, why am I not seeing more? Because the problem is not users are not trying to use AI. The problem is you're not seeing.
So in your role as a field CISO, what size firms were you typically working?
So that was interesting. Fortra has clients from the SMB space all the way up through large enterprise. Fortra is a company that has grown and so has picked up solutions matching every market, whether it's managed detection and response on the SMB side of the market or DLP in mid-market, to the enterprise DLP, all of the red teaming tools for the large established organizations that have the red teams. But the customers I ended up talking with most were at the large end of the medium business segment and the low end of enterprise. They're the ones that are in that rapid growth stage.
So you were typically working with senior technology people as opposed to, say, an outsourced provider or business leads in that case?
Yeah, for the most part. Fortra did have a model that they had managed service providers on both the MDR and DLP side, so you could do managed DLP with an established channel program and established channel managers. That was pretty much self-running. It ran pretty well. The real questions were coming from customers who wanted to know, okay, of the 40 things I can do, what are the 4 that are most important? And that conversation always came back to the same security conversation of you have an application that uses data that runs on a network that presents itself through an edge connection. So you still need application, data, network, and edge protection. Where does that fit in each of your silos?
Yeah, so we've we take it, the way we've approached it in our MSP practice has been we look at how does data move through your environment? How does money move through your environment? Where are your risk points in that chain? And then identify what the financial cost is to fix the risk versus just accept the risk.
Exactly.
And that by figuring that out, we can kind of have put together a proper plan to essentially adjust their, cybersecurity maturity level as they progress. Because, we know it's a journey. It's not a one-time thing. I think everyone would love to, wave a magic wand and say, we are now secure. That doesn't work.
Right.
So one thing you'd like a security leader that's listening today or a business leader that's listening today to do differently in the real world from what they're doing today, what would that be?
All right, so this is sort of self-serving. One of the things I really enjoyed at AWS conferences was the executive game days that they ran, where they would set up a scenario that showed, hey, we're gonna pretend that you run a unicorn factory and you've launched an AI app and this happens, and you had to go through and make strategic choices and investment choices at an executive level to see, how do I make sure that I've protected my company, my data, my investors, and my customers? And on those 4 axes. And it was a really good use of time to get into the CISO mindset or the COO mindset of, okay, what actually happens beyond the breach? What are the other things I'm for? I would say if you're a customer that hasn't smoke tested your existing AI governance or strategic executive approach to how you would handle any kind of an AI scenario, whether it's a breach or your board says, hey, we need you to expand in the market. Here's an M&A target. Do quick due diligence. How do I run through strategy, evaluate what they have, what they build? If you haven't smoke tested your strategy along with your governance, that's something I would encourage everyone to do. We happen to offer that as a service, but even if you don't get it from me, what you need confidence that your strategy works and clarity into where your governance helps and where it harms.
Can you explain, for someone who may not understand the term smoke test, can you explain what that means?
Yeah. So what we'd like to do is have a conversation around what's your biggest AI risk? Is it somebody hacking your AI? Is it looking over your shoulder and the startup who has nothing to lose and can do velocity 100 is going to outpace you in the market and start taking away customers? Is it you're in a strong M&A environment? You may need to sell a part of your business or acquire a part of the business. Work with them on what's your largest risk, and then go start double clicking into, okay, what is your strategic approach? Are you aggressive when it comes to M&A? Are you defensive when it comes to M&A? Would you turn off a customer-facing app that brought in $10 million a month in revenue for a $1 million potential exposure if there are regulatory concerns? What is the scenario and what's your strategic approach? To your point, do I mitigate the risk or do I accept the cost of the risk and I've got it covered through insurance? And then the next piece is, let's actually go through and simulate that event and use your strategy and follow your governance. And we'll have teams compete against teams at the executive level. If we can get 12 or 16 people, senior director or higher, let's go see how this actually works. And then coming out of that, spend the last half of the day, what worked, what didn't? Do you need to change your strategy? Should you change your governance? And then finally, do you need help with that or do you have it on your own? But smoke testing is basically taking my strategy and my governance and my approach and actually running it through in a real likely scenario to see, do my people understand it, and do the choices they make mirror the strategy I think I've communicated, and does our governance incorporate all of the choices we have?
So it's kind of like doing a tabletop exercise before you put something out there, essentially.
It is, but instead of just a tabletop, something that's interactive, where instead of just going through the docs and reading back and forth across the table, I can actually simulate, okay, you made this strategic choice. You decided to invest here instead of here. What would happen next in that scenario?
Right.
And then just like real life, there's a little bit of randomness in there.
Sure.
So, hey, maybe the hacker gets in, maybe they don't. Maybe somebody else buys the company before you do, maybe they don't. But throw that little bit of randomness in there, so not everybody reaches the same conclusion, and it lets you test. Okay, again, do my people have clarity on the way that we need to work so they can make decisions? And more importantly, am I confident that if it did happen, we already know how to respond?
Mike, this was an awesome conversation. I really thank you for taking the time to talk with us. Where can people find you and follow you?
We are realissolutions.com. Realis is a term from the literary side of in the real. So not imaginary. And our logo is real is. So that's a lot to help us find. We also happen to be on YouTube, and we have a Substack at realissolutions.substack.com.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike.
I appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us on the Cybersecurity Show podcast, and we'll see you next time.
Fantastic.